Now, as I say, we've got a long way ahead of us. Do you want to hear me going on and on, or do you just want to chill out amongst yourselves?
Go on, please.
Sorry?
Go on.
I can't hear.
Go on.
You want me to tell you a story?
Yes.
So I'll give you a choice. You can listen to, I was about the story of Mary Queen of Scots, the story of Robert the Bruce and the Wars of Independence, or, as I said earlier on, the story of the Vikings and their when they arrived here in Scotland and their involvement, or I've got another one, the true story of Macbeth, completely different from what you've heard from Shakespeare. That's probably all the ones I can think of off the top of my head. Any preferences?
The Vikings.
The Vikings, okay, it had to be the Vikings, didn't it? Right, we're going to go back in time, all the way down to where that transitional period from us being paganistic Celts and Vikings to Scots. Now, in 793, a group of Viking longboats attacked an island on the west coast of England, the east coast of England, called Lindisfarne. They were looking for treasure, but what the monks at Lindisfarne called treasure and the Vikings called treasure were two completely different things. The monks had relics of St Cuthbert, by which I mean a finger bone, a jaw bone, and I think it was an arm bone. Those are relics, the real McCoy belonging to the saint. But the Vikings were looking for treasure, gold and silver and things like that. So they martyred all of the monks at Lindisfarne. That was the first recorded attack on these islands by the Vikings. Now, through time from that period, they took over large parts of Ireland. I'm guessing they took over most of Wales. I'm not sure about Wales. They took over the Northern Islands, so that's the Shetland and the Orkney Isles, and the Western Isles, so that's the Outer Hebrides and the Inner Hebrides, and eventually they even took over the very, very, very north part of Scotland, but they never actually took over Scotland as a whole. They took over England, leaving only Wessex. That was the height of the Viking power here in these islands. Now, during that period, there was a group of Vikings who came, when they came to the Northern Islands, they eliminated all the Celts that were there, killed them all, genocide. When they came to the north of Scotland, it was a very uneasy peace. We know this because in Shetland and Orkney, there aren't any Gaelic place names left. It's all Nordic place names. In the north of Scotland, but there's a hawk sitting on the fence over there, or maybe it wasn't. Anyway, in the north of Scotland, they've got Viking and Celtic place names, so that means there's been a mixture of both. On the Western Isles, there are mostly Celtic place names with just a few Nordic place names. So, what we reckon is when they came to the Western Isles, they were settlers rather than conquerors, more like that. And between the Celtic people that already lived there and the Nordic settlers, a whole new race of people came from it. We call them Gaul-Gael. Gaul means stranger, Gael is Gaelic. We're known as the Gaelic strangers, a mix of Nordic and Celtic people. My ancestors are from that exact part of the country. Therefore I consider myself to be a Gaul-Gael. I reckon I must be one of the smallest minorities in the whole world. The only place you'll find us is in that strip of islands down between Ireland and Scotland. Anyway, one group of them was led by a man called Somerled. Now, Somerled's father was an Irish chieftain and his mother was a Dane, or a Scandinavian, I'm not sure exactly what. And he became one of the most powerful men in the West. Now, at that point, the Western Oceans were far too ferocious for the flimsy boats that they had back then to deal with. So you have the weather and the storms coming right across the Atlantic Ocean. When they hit the west coast of Scotland, they smash against all these 790 islands, as I said earlier. The water picks up speed and ferocity and momentum. There are really treacherous waters out there. In fact, the third biggest whirlpool maelstrom in the world is out there. It's called the Corryvreckan. I believe 1 and 2 are in Scandinavia. The waters of the Pentland Firth between Orkney and the very north of Scotland, there's a cape there. We've got Cape Horn, Cape of Good Hope, some of the most treacherous waterways in the world, but we've got Cape Wrath up at the top of Scotland. The channel between the Orkney Isles and the mainland have proven to be absolutely deadly to shipping. That effect where ships just suddenly lose buoyancy and sink, that's actually happened up there as well. There's weird things go on up here. You've got the Atlantic Ocean from one side, the North Sea for another side, and in that area in between there's very strange things happen with the water. Now, and for that, Somerled and his people were pretty well impregnable. The Scottish king couldn't do anything about them. Getting to there would have been the problem. Their castle was called Finlagan Castle. Finlagan Castle was a house. Its defences were the ocean all around it. Getting to Islay, where Finlagan Castle was, that was the defences of the castle. And of course all the hundreds of men underneath Somerled. Now, Somerled went on, his children went on to become the Clan MacDonald and Clan MacDougall. Now, I can't remember if it was this morning I mentioned it to you guys, but clans were formed when the king tried to put the tribes against each other, and at this point Somerled was surrounded. They were tribal at this point. They believed in a system that's now completely gone, a system called canistry, which means the king is elected, and every king that dies, so if he doesn't do a good job, they will brutally murder him. That way nobody that's not up to the job will apply for the job. It has to be only the best of the best of the best that apply for the job. Brutally murdered, I kid you not. So each king in turn is elected. You live the life of luxury, have everything you want, servants, riches, anything you want. You are the king, but you're elected. Therefore your children will not necessarily take the throne ahead of you, not unless they've proven themselves to be as good as you are. Very, very few cases really where that was the case. Anyway, there was a Spaniard came to Edinburgh, and when he went home to Spain he was asked, what is the most impressive thing you saw in Scotland? And he said, well, actually it wasn't a thing, it was a man. It was a man who came from the Western Isles. He didn't have two pennies to rub together. He'd given himself a title. Only the king is allowed to give you a title, but he'd given himself a title, and that title was the Lord of the Isles. And he commanded an army that even made the king stand back and look at. This man was, of course, well, it wasn't Somerled, it was one of his descendants. Anyway, these people held strength and sway over the Western Isles for many generations. Now, it came into a period known as the Scottish Wars of Independence. Our king had died, our King Alexander III, he died by riding his horse off a cliff. It was by accident, of course. He was desperate to get back to his new wife, a woman called Yondala. He'd been at Edinburgh Castle. He had to cross over the Firth of Forth, travel up the Fife coastline and get to the palace where his new wife was, but in his haste he rode off a cliff. It started a debate in Scotland. We called it the Great Cause, to pick the next family that would be the royal family of Scotland, but everybody started trying to kill each other to get the title. So they decided they needed an arbitrator, and who better? Now, Alexander had been married a second, so his first wife had died. Her name was Margaret of England, or Margaret of the Tower. She was the sister of Edward I of England. Now, if you know your Braveheart movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This is something that people don't know. Edward and Alexander were brother-in-laws, and they got on really, really well. It's actually one of the most peaceful periods of history between Scotland and England. They were known to have corresponded regularly with each other on family matters and affairs of state and things like that. When the Great Cause was breaking down, they asked Edward if he would arbitrate for them. Well, of course, Edward decided, my sister was Queen of Scotland, why shouldn't I be king? and Edward took advantage of the situation. Now, Edward was a brilliant man, brilliant military strategist, not somebody to be trifled with at all. Now, he didn't try to take the crown of Scotland, but what he did do was force all the nobles of Scotland to submit to him. They all had to sign a contract called the Ragman Roll. Now, Edward began a new campaign in France, and he started asking, he'd chosen a new king for Scotland, a man called John Balliol. John Balliol was a puppet king. He had we called him Tomb Tabard, that meant empty coat. He had no heart or, stomach or anything for warfare or violence, exactly what Edward wanted, a puppet king. He demanded Scottish men to come and fight in his war in France, and of course that's where we drew the line. He was taxing us to the hill, we drew the line, and we began rebellions. So a man called William Wallace in the south and a man called Andrew de Moray in the north began to rebel against Edward. So Edward sent an army, but the army was under a man called the Earl of Surrey, and he did not give the Scots credit. He thought we were a bunch of farmers that couldn't, they're lucky if we could plough a field. We were not. These people were descendants of that great Celtic nation. The Celts were warriors through and through, born fighters, and so were the Scots at that point. They managed to devastate Edward's army under Surrey. When Surrey went back and told Edward the news, Edward was not happy at all. He began a full-on campaign against Scotland. The only reason that stopped him accomplishing his final goal was to subjugate Scotland was the fact that he died before he had finally gotten Scotland under his control. His son, Edward II, he just wasn't interested in war at all. In fact, he backed out of Scotland and moved away. Now, took the English army out of Scotland. It left Robert the Bruce, which was our king by this time, with only one problem. Half of Scotland had been in support of Edward and half of Scotland had been in support of him. The main reason being that in order to get the crown, Robert the Bruce had already been crowned, but he had an arch rival who he murdered in front of a high altar. That proved really tragic for Scotland because we were excommunicated by the Pope for that. And it took till 1228 before we were finally reconciliated by the Pope. But anyway, this left Robert the Bruce to only his own people to deal with, and he began to move around section by section. Now, the Cummings were the family that he had to defeat, and in fact the northeast of Scotland, the Cummings stronghold, it said that there wasn't a man or boy left to plough the fields for 2 generations after Robert the Bruce left the area. Little known part of the Scottish Wars of Independence. Now, Robert came to the Western Isles. Now these Western Islanders, the Lords of the Isles, they weren't really interested in Robert being their king. Remember how I explained Tanistry? Robert the Bruce was a feudalistic king, which meant he was king, his son would be king, his son's son would be king, and so on and so forth. They didn't believe in that. What happens if Robert the Bruce's son was a useless king, which actually was the case? No, we're not having that. We're not supporting Robert the Bruce. And they even allowed themselves to be bribed by Edward. Edward, they gave them a chest of treasure. Edward had been told, give them it, but don't divide it amongst themselves. That'll keep them occupied. That was a good advice, because it did. It kept them away from supporting Robert the Bruce. But Robert the Bruce needed their support. There's a lot of men behind the Lords of the Isles. Now, during that period, prior to the Wars of Independence, our King Edward and King Haakon, sorry if I've got the Nordic king's name wrong, most of them are Haakon. Anyway, they had a peace treaty, and if I remember correctly, it was the Treaty of Perth, where everything that Haakon could sail his ship around belonged to him, and everything that was left belonged to Edgar. But when Haakon got to the Kintyre Peninsula, so on the other side of the country from Edinburgh, you've got Glasgow. There's a firth comes out of Glasgow and goes down into the Atlantic, and then it goes up the way, and you've got Islay, where the Lords of the Isles were, and Jura to the north of that. But that peninsula of land, Kintyre Peninsula, only had a neck of about 1 kilometre. When Haakon got to that neck of land, he stood at the prow of his ship and had his ships dragged over the peninsula, and he claimed the entire peninsula to himself, and he got it. So Robert the Bruce, this is about 200 years later, Robert the Bruce is remembering there is a legend laid down after that event. If ever ships are seen to the north that weren't previously seen to the south, the area will fall. What that means is the only way to get to Islay is to come down the Firth of Clyde and then come up towards Islay like that. That's the only possible way you can do it, unless of course you drag your ships over that isthmus. And that's exactly what Robert the Bruce done. He had his whole fleet dragged over the isthmus. Now, the Lords of the Isles, they had their fleet ready for Robert the Bruce. They're facing down the way, and the wind predominantly is in their favour, a northerly wind. But when Robert the Bruce came up behind them, they had to turn their ships round, and then they were on the wrong side of the wind. Their ships were unmanoeuvrable, whereas Robert the Bruce, he was able to manoeuvre his ships. The battle lasted only about 45 minutes. There weren't really a lot of casualties in it, but right at the end, the Lords of the Isles, they submitted to Robert the Bruce. It was a man called Angus Og MacDonald. He was the Lord of the Isles at that point, and he took a knee before Robert the Bruce and says, "You've proven yourself to be a worthy king for us. We'll support you. You can be our king." And Angus Og actually became one of Robert the Bruce's most powerful allies throughout the rest of his campaign for the Scottish Wars of Independence. Now, during this time, there was another clan that was slowly but surely coming into prominence. That was the Clan Campbell. In later years, the Clan Campbell and the Clan MacDonald were soon to become absolutely deadly enemies. In fact, right to this day, the MacDonalds and the Campbells hate each other with a real vengeance. Now, as the Wars of Independence came to an end, the Campbells, they had learned something that the MacDonalds hadn't. They were marrying into power. They were gaining lands. They were marrying the right people, slowly but surely coming up the social ladder. Whereas the MacDonalds had been blessed with lots and lots of land given to them by Robert the Bruce. Robert the Bruce died in 1328, 1329. His son, David II, took over. David II went to the Vikings, went to the Lords of the Isles, and he said to them, "As you did with my father, I will command you, you'll do what I say." And John MacDonald of Islay, who was then Lord of the Isles, he turned round and says, he laughed at him right in his face, and he says, "The best you're going to get from us is peace." They were at a neutral territory where they could have an arbitrary meeting with each other. Well, John MacDonald laughed. "Ha! Best you'll get from us is peace, and you'll like it." And there was nothing that the king could do at this point. King James I. James went back to Edinburgh. He was absolutely livid, and he asked help from his advisors. Now, one of the things that his advisors said to him was, "These wildcats, they're always fighting each other, and whenever they do so, they usually look for the highest arbitrator to solve their problems. That'll be you. They'll start coming to you for help." And it did. That's exactly what happened. When they came to the king for help, forgetting about what had happened in the past, the king gave them bad advice. And it wasn't just King James I. The subsequent kings after that done exactly the same. They constantly gave these people bad advice in the hope that it would break down their strength. That's really what they were aiming for. But it wasn't too long before and it wasn't just the Lords of the Isles, it was all the clans and tribes on the western coast of Scotland. They all got wise to what was being done to them, and that's when they broke out of the tribal units. So my own people were Seol Amara, people of the sea. There's Seol Each, people of the horse. Seol Lach, people of the duck. Doesn't sound very tough, does it? People of the duck. There's a hidden message in there. They had a big duck on their shields. We're the people of the duck. We're well fed, we're fat, we're healthy. Don't attack us because we're very capable of defending themselves. See how they thought completely differently back then than how we do now. Anyway, so yeah, the king began to break them down, and they broke down into the family units at this point. Now, as now I've lost my place. Slowly but surely, the MacDonalds were losing favour with the king. They were coming back down the ladder while the Campbells are going up the ladder on the other side. Ardvrecki Castle on the other side of the loch here, by the way. There it is over there, directly to the right of us. Anyway, so the MacDonalds are going down in favour, the Campbells are coming up in favour. The Campbells are being given land that had been given to the MacDonalds already. This is where that real hatred between those two families began. Now, eventually, King Edward III of England, he came to John MacDonald of Islay, and he said to him, I want to do a deal with you. If you make a treaty with me, I'll give you everything to the north of Glasgow and Edinburgh. That'll belong to you. I want the rest of Scotland. Why he done this was because Scotland had a treaty with France against England. We called it the Old Alliance. If ever England attacked France, Scotland would attack England. If ever England attacked Scotland, France would attack England. That's the rules of the Old Alliance. Scotland and France have always gotten on very well with each other. In fact, we have never drawn swords against each other. Anyway, that's what Edward wanted to destroy, because he wanted to attack France, and he didn't want the Scots attacking his back door, but he was in France. So he arranged to meet John MacDonald at Ardtornish Castle, really remote castle way out in the Western Isles. Obviously Edward arrived there by boat, and they called it the Westminster Ardtornish Treaty. When Edward attacked Scotland, John would attack Scotland from the north and get the King James in a pincer movement. And what John didn't realise was he was getting a really bad deal out of this. He was a country bumpkin. He didn't understand the ins and outs, the technicalities that a city slicker could put upon him. And John was all in agreement, and he was ready to do this. But Edward, he lost interest in dealing with John, and he just wanted to go to France anyway. So what he'd done was he went to the Scottish king and says, look, this Lord of the Isles chap, he has signed a peace treaty against me, and it's high treason. Read that. Showed him what the agreement was. King James was absolutely livid. Of course, we're talking king to king at this point. King, oh yeah, I was going to stab you in the back, but yeah, that's all over now. Here, look, there's another traitor for you. I'll give you him. Oh, that's great. Thanks very much, Edward. That's what it would have been like, king to king. So King James sent for John of Islay. John of Islay, remember I said he had no money. He was a poor man. He was rich in everything but money. Now, by this time in history, ships were much better, and the King of Scotland, we're in the Cairngorms National Park now, and the King of Scotland had ships that were able to get to Islay now. So he was able to send a fleet to Islay and an army to Islay as well. John very quickly found it had no supporters and no money. He'd went on the run, but he was not the type of person to be hiding in the mountains, and hunting rabbits and hiding in a cave. That wasn't his style. He decided to give himself up, and he went to Holyrood in Edinburgh. He gave himself over to the king. The king stripped him down to his shirt, his sword and his knife and all his weapons, made him lay prostrate on the floor in front of him. He stripped him of all of his titles, barring that one that he'd given himself, the Lordship of the Isles. John thought that he was going to meet a traitor's death, hung, drawn and quartered, but he was thrown in the jail at Holyrood, where he was left for several months before finally being released and allowed to go back to Islay with, remember, only with that one title, Lord of the Isles. Everything else had been taken off of him. When John got back to Islay though, he had a son. His son's name was Angus Og MacDonald, the same name as that previous one, the one that was Robert the Bruce's most favourite. Right hand side, guys, gatehouse to Ardvrecki Castle. How's about that? Anyway, Angus Og MacDonald, he could command all his father's men, and most of his father's men weren't happy about what the king had done to John. They'd taken all these lands off him, and Angus Og's, in his mind, that was his inheritance that had just been taken away from him. The king had already issued these lands that had been taken away from John, mostly Ross and Cromarty in the north of Scotland, and so Angus Og went up there with his army army, his father's army basically, and started attacking and killing the lords, the king's own lords. The king was absolutely livid when word reached him back in Edinburgh. He summoned John. You come here, I want to speak to you. You have been nothing but a thorn in my side, and I have been very lenient with you. And here, the whole thing has just started up again. I thought I'd put an end to this. You will deal with your son Angus, or I will deal with you. And off John went. But the king wasn't finished there. He summoned Archibald Campbell, the chief of the clan Campbell. And you are no better with you and the MacDonalds always fighting each other. The two of you are just a complete pain to me. You will help John deal with Angus, or I will deal with both of you. Get out of my sight. Now remember what I've said, these two men hate each other with the kind of anger that whenever they come into a room together, they put their hands around each other's throats and start to squeeze. They hate each other. But now they have to sit over a table and discuss what to do with Angus Og. To make matters worse, in an vain attempt to ease tension between the two families, Angus Og was married to Archibald's daughter. So remember, Angus Og MacDonald is married to the daughter of Archibald Campbell. Now that is a very serious twist in the tale here. The two men over the table, we've got no choice. It's war. Remember, Angus Og has already got most of his father's army behind him because they support what Angus is standing for, not for the father who's just been defeated. Remember that laws of Tanistry? You're a failed king, we don't want anything to do with you. Well, John had failed. He submitted to the king. As far as they were concerned, that was a failure. Young Angus had the power. The two armies, so John MacDonald of Islay and Archibald Campbell against Angus Og MacDonald. They met at a place called Bloody Bay. Now this is the first time that I'm going to give you a date, because the dates of this is very awkward. They're not really sure, but I can give you a date. The Battle of Bloody Bay was circa, so that means round about 1495. The two armies met. Now this was a naval engagement, and still to this day this is the greatest naval engagement ever to have happened in British waters, by which I mean it would be the most number of ships in the engagement. Young Angus took the day. He defeated both his father and his father-in-law. During the battle, his father-in-law's sons, all of them were killed, which meant that there was nobody to replace Archibald Campbell as chief of the clan Campbells when he died. Nobody apart from, well, his daughter was pregnant to Angus Og. If that was a boy, that boy would automatically be the chief of the clan Campbells. That just could not happen. Have a MacDonald as chief of clan Campbell, that was a no-no. Whatever he'd done, he had to do it then. He kidnapped his daughter. He stole her away and took her to a place called Inchconnell Castle. Still to this day, Inchconnell is one of the most difficult castles to reach in Scotland. It was way down near the foot of Loch Awe, still to this day, as I said, a very remote place. He locked his pregnant daughter in the castle, and at that point nobody really knew what had happened to her. Now, as time went by, she had a son. As I said, he should have been chief of the clan Campbell, but that never transposed because he was locked away. But when John of Islay died, Angus Og did become Lord of the Isles. But because he was such a powerful man, nobody wanted him to get out of that castle stronghold. It's on an island. I don't know if I mentioned that. It's on an island. Nobody wanted him to get out of that castle stronghold. He remained there for the first 18 years of his life. Eventually, we're into the era of Henry VIII. Now, Henry VIII, he's the one that changed this country from being a Catholic to a Protestant country. It was all due to well, let me go back. Henry VIII was actually a very good king to start with, but he had a severe accident. He fell off a horse while he was jousting. He hurt his leg, and he had several other injuries that plagued him for the rest of his life, and it made him a very bitter and angry man. He wanted a male heir, but it just wasn't happening, so he was divorcing all of these wives, but the Catholic Church would not allow him to divorce. Hence, he took up this new doctrine of Lutheranism, where he would be allowed to divorce. That's actually what caused him to make that changeover. He was trying to force his nephew, James James V of Scotland. He was trying to force his nephew also to turn, and they met at a battle called Solway Moss. It was more of a sort of battle of handbags. Very few men were killed, and it was more of an argument than anything. But anyway, eventually Edward wanted to attack Scotland, to force his will on Scotland, and he had a spy in the midst. Oh look, more unicorns, guys. He had a spy in the midst, a man called Lord Lennox, a Scottish nobleman. He called on Lord Lennox and he said to him, "Okay Lennox, I want to take Scotland, what would you suggest I do?" And Lennox said to him, "Well, Your Highness, there is a man who's locked up away from everybody, but that man controls the Highlanders and the Islanders. It's a massive army. If you get this man on your side, which you can do very easily, if you get this man on your side, you will be able to defeat the Scottish king without any problem at all." So of course Henry VIII says to him, you go and do this. Lennox makes his way to Loch Awe. He waits until the darkest part of the night. They launch a boat into the water. They pad the oars of the boat with sheep's wool, which makes it absolutely silent as they paddle out to Inchconnell Castle. They paddle out. Now, the people at Inchconnell's a self-supporting place. They hunt for food. They've got a well, everything they need right there. They go out and get wood for fire. Nobody needs to come down to the castle. So they probably hadn't seen anybody in months at this point. When they got onto the island with the castle, there was nobody there to stop them. They got up to the gates of the castle, they got into the castle, no problem at all. They were able to overpower the guards very, very easily and make their way into the castle. Now, by this time, the boy had grown up to become Donald Dubh. That was his name, Black Donald Dubh. He had a shock of black hair, so they called him Black Donald. He knew what was going on outside. He was very, very aware that the castle was being taken, and he knew why it was being taken. When Lord Lennox came to the room where Donald was being held and unbolted the door, opened the door. Now remember, this is one of the most powerful people. Oh, pheasant! This is one of the most powerful people in all of Scotland at this time. The first words to come out of Donald Dubh's mouth when he was released from his jail, from his imprisonment by Lord Lennox, was, "I hate all Scotsmen my enemies." That was the first word that he said. He was very quick to take up on Lord Lennox's proposal. "You go to Ireland, I will meet you in Ireland, we will raise an army. When we get word from Henry VIII, he's going to attack Scotland from the south, we're going to attack Scotland from the north." That's how it was done, seemingly. So off Donald Dubh went to Ireland, but when he got there, Lennox was dragging his heels, and Donald Dubh was there by himself for quite some time. The Irish and the Scots also have always gotten on very, very well. They had an extradition treaty. Again, the Irish and the Scots have never actually drawn swords against each other in a national battle. It's never happened. The Irish knew who Donald Dubh was. Didn't need photographs or anything like that. They knew exactly who this man was, and they sent word to the Scottish king saying, "Look, this man's here, and we know that he's about to attack you. He's just waiting on word to do it." So the Scottish King James sent word back to Ireland and says, "Can you extradite him over here?" Before Lord Lennox was able to get there and support Donald Dubh, he was grabbed by the Irish authorities and sent over to Edinburgh, where he was placed before King James. Yeah, I know, wow, isn't it? He was placed And here's more of them coming. This road isn't actually broad enough for two vehicles to pass each other. I'm as far over as I can get. Oh, there he goes, he's not going to do it. Anyway, he was set before King James in Edinburgh. King James, again, should have executed him for treason. Donald Dubh could not understand why he wasn't being executed, but just like his father, he was thrown into jail. He was thrown into the dungeons of Tantallon Castle, where he was to spend the rest of his natural life. That's where he died, simply because he was so powerful. The man was so powerful. Now, after the death of Donald Dubh, nobody wanted to take the title on again. In recent times, King Charles, when he was Prince Charles, he had the title Lord of the Isles, and I'm going to guess that now Prince William has the title Lordship of the Isles. He was destined to be one of the most powerful people in Scotland, and he instead spent his entire life, barring 1 or 2 months, in captivity. Oh, more. There we go. More pheasants. Anyway, that is the story of Donald Dubh, the last Lord of the Isles, and an introduction to the Vikings here in Scotland. Right, my jaw's sore now. Hope you all enjoyed that. Thank you very much. Let's just enjoy the view. We're almost about to join the motorway, which is on the other side of the valley from here. We'll join that, and it's about 40 minutes to our last stop of the day. So we'll stop there and we'll see the coos, and we'll get some coffee, and we'll get a restroom and get something to eat before the final push to Edinburgh, which will take us just a little bit more than an hour.